Right, so it's 12:30 and we are all set to begin with our today's webinar. A very warm welcome to all our participants present here today. Diversity and inclusion is more than policies, programs, or headcounts. Equitable employers outspace their competitors by respecting the unique needs, perspectives, and potential of all their team members. As a result, diverse and inclusive workspace earn deeper trust and more commitment from their employees. A diverse and inclusive workplace is one that makes everyone, regardless of who they are or what they do for the business, feel equally involved in and supported in all areas of the workplace. HR Association of India welcomes you all to the 2022 Dialogue Masterclass series on the topic Diversity and Inclusion. To know more about HRAI and its events, I would request all our participants to visit the link and details posted in the chat window. Request all the participants to kindly follow the webinar guidelines mentioned in the chat window. It would be great to have all the participants' feedback. We will be running a poll before the Q&A session. Request all the participants to kindly give your feedback on the session. I now take the privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Zainab Patel, Lead Inclusion and Diversity, Pernod Ricard, India. Pronouns she, her, hers. Zainab was born in Mumbai. She is a transgender person and is one of the petitioners in the National Legal Services Authority versus Union of India case on transgender rights. She currently works with Pernod Ricard India as the Chief Inclusion and Diversity. Prior to this, she worked with KPMG as the Director Diversity and Inclusion. She holds an MBA in HR and was the National Manager Health and Human Rights at UNDP, country office in India, and was the Regional Policy Analyst on Human Rights in Asia. Her areas of interest are health and social development issues and comes with over 20 years of national and international work experience. She currently serves as Western India representative in the National Council for Transgender Persons and is Kamal Nayan Bajaj Aspen Global Fellow. Without wasting much time, I now hand over the platform to Zainab Patel. Over to you, Zainab.
Thank you, Faisal. A very good afternoon to all of you all. Although I started the day by kind of telling Faisal it's a good morning, not a good afternoon. But I'll take that leeway with you all and wish you all very good afternoon and also happy Pride Month to all. Now, before I start my presentation with you and I take you to a small journey, I want to actually tell you there are a lot of times people around us, people who are naysayers, people who are homophobic, transphobic, people who are unaware, ask us, why such a big brouhaha about Pride Month? What's so great about Pride? Why is there such a splattering of the rainbow? Why is there so much of noise and visibility around the month of June? So some of you may perhaps be aware, and some of you may perhaps not be aware or have incomplete information. So let me tell you why Pride started. So the Pride that we see today is vibrant, colorful. It talks about inclusive language. It talks about understanding. It talks about bringing people together, the connect. But Pride, when it started in 1969, started off as a riot, as a protest. Now, what was this riot about? This riot started off in a small place called Greenwich Village in Stonewall Inn. So what was the Stonewall Inn? Stonewall Inn was an LGBT meeting space. And at that time, because of the various criminal sanctions that were still in place, meeting people was still underground. So it was like a typical Bollywood movie setting where the bar owner would have contacts with the police. The police would give a tip off to the bar folks saying that there's going to be a raid. They would in turn inform their patrons and all would be okay. But that one particular day, two plainclothes policemen enter the bar. They take a stock of what's happening at Stonewall Inn. They use the bar payphone to call the police outside and tell them the signal is green, enter. And you have a host of policemen in plain clothes enter the bar, and they start making arrests. They switch off the lights, they switch off the music, and they start segregating people according to their gender. So people who dressed and looked like men were filed in a line. People who dressed and looked like women were filed in another line. Now, what was also humiliating was that they started passing comments on people, on behaviors, on attitudes. And a particular female police officer was taking those people who either were trans-identified, were cross-dressers, or gender non-conforming, taking them to the washroom, making them strip, check their genitals, and then arresting them. And this entire revolt started off as a revolt and protest and a riot situation against the police. And that showed how people in the community stood up against tyranny. And incidentally, that celebration, that protest is now grown into a global movement. With this, I want to actually take you to a particular situation, and with the permission of Faisal and those at HRAI, I want to use a small presentation for
Yeah,
this
yeah,
session.
sure.
Is it okay?
Yeah, sure, Zainab. You can.
Thank you so much. So, when we see this beautiful, colorful rainbow, not only in my background, but in the screens in front of you, you see that, oh, this is something that we see so much in this month. And what are we going to be doing about it? So, let me tell you why pride is still relevant today. Why it's so important. So, it's slightly dated map, but nothing much has changed from the context perspective. So, at least for India. So, India continues to be a beige where you have legislation on trans that is protecting them under the Protection of Transgender Persons Act. You have the Supreme Court of India decriminalize same-sex behavior among consenting adults. But you see the glow. In the shades of blue and dark blue are countries which actually have protective legislation in place. Where there is constitutional gap, the darker blue, the navy blue places are places where the constitution actually guarantees. So parts of South Africa, Latin America, Mexico, Canada, all of these countries, and surprisingly Mongolia, out of the absolute blue, Mongolia comes up and is a lighter blue shade where there is protection on some grounds. Now, come to the larger, lighter shades where we are talking about some laws or some protective legislation or some protective judgment in place, to countries where the shade transforms from a blue to a dark shade of umber, brown, red. Now, even as we look at, and while I'm not going to recount where we are in terms of the browns, I want to point out to those 7 countries which have a dark red shade that looks like rust. And those countries are those countries where you can be beheaded or receive capital punishment for being LGBTI. Think of that. Some of these are in our extreme neighborhood. Some of these are more in North Africa. Some of these are in the Middle East. And that's the reason why, even today, when you see half of the world, and when you see this map, you suddenly realize, oh, it's such an unequal world. Can you tell me one place in the world where it's criminal to love, for a cisgendered person to love another cisgendered person? No. And that's the reason why today also, and throughout the year, we need to observe and celebrate Pride. With that thought in mind, I'm going to take you to the next few slides. So what is allyship? We keep hearing this term so many times. Ally, I'm an ally. We are an LGBT ally. We run the Pride ERG. We do these things. For me, it's something very, very simple. So whether you're an HR practitioner, you're a CXO, you're a manager, you're a people's person, you're an entry level associate. Allyship puts you all on the same page. No discrimination. So what is the ally supposed to do? The ally is supposed to join someone else, another person, another group in order to give support. And support for what? Support against harassment, against discrimination, against unfair practices, along willful exclusion. In some cases, it could also be, threat to life and property. And what is actually interesting and important for us to actually know is that every one of us, that means each and every one of you listening onto this call, if you are not an ally already, you have the capacity to be an ally for someone else. Okay, some of us are probably rolled up our rainbow socks. Some of us are interested. Oh, there is these things that we want to do for the community. Now that we've signed up for being an ally, now that we are ready to be the change, what next? So for me, I look at it from 3 to 4 main perspectives. What does an ally do? It take responsibility for making a change, right? We as allies, what sets us different is our capacity, our privilege, our power to make change happen. What's the thing we do second? We understand our privilege, because it's not about us. It's about that per individual or group of persons that we are talking about. It could be women, it could be men, it could be trans folks, non-binary persons. It could be on various issues. We realize that we are allies because we have power and privilege. So understand your privilege, understand the need that you come in from a different society, you come in from a better socio-economic condition. You may be from a job profile work, you may be different. The language spoken, you may be different. From your ableism perspective, you may be different and have privilege over orientation. Third part is your allyship journey is incomplete or will falter if you don't educate yourself. And how do I educate? And why do I need to educate myself? Because just like everyone else, we have biases, we have microaggression, we practice iniquities. And in order to start our journey as a change person, we need to educate ourselves. And the fourth but important part of your conversation, your journey as an ally, is telling people about your community. It's a little shiny badge that you wear. It's that rainbow, colored T-shirt, a lanyard, a wristband, a pride flag, an email signature, but which signifies your commitment to a cause. So sometimes people ask me, what's the privilege, Zainab? What's my privilege? I come from the same educational institute as you. I'm also working in the same institution in your same shop floor. We both come from the same area in Mumbai. Imagine if you are a cisgender heterosexual person, what is your privilege coming from? Sometimes you would probably know it, sometimes you would probably know it. And sometimes we don't realize we are not seeing the whole picture. So what's the whole picture? You can be privileged on grounds of income, on education, on the grounds of your sex, on language, on ability, on race, your age, your region perhaps that you come from, your city perhaps. You may come from a tier 2 city, tier 1 city. Take time to, it's like peels of onion. The moment you remove one, you realize there's another one underneath. Take time to learn about these issues. Because sometimes the protection in our organizations may not be enough to help the person. So we need to use our power and privilege to bolster our courage for speaking up for people. Let me tell you something. Let me give you an example of privilege. In a study done out somewhere, but still very relevant to the Indian context, this was not a study done in India, it was a workplace study in the US. 70% of non-LGBTQ identified employees believe it's very unprofessional to discuss sexual orientation or gender identity in the workplace. Don't we hear that very often? Why do we need to talk about sexual orientation? That's your personal matter. Why do I need to know your transgender status? And yet, the same people who give these responses never worry about their pronouns being wrong, about coming out to people, about the need to come out to people, about the need felt to protect themselves from abuse because their identity is so mainstream. And these two blurbs that you see on the screen is just showing that how difficult or easy it is sometimes to have a conversation. My husband and I are spending Diwali, Christmas with his family. Oh, I love that movie. And this could perhaps be a cisgender person, or a heterosexual person, or a homosexual person, or a same-sex attracted person saying that. How easy or difficult do you think these two blurbs are easy to say? When we talk about educate yourself, ask Google or a friend, just not a random stranger. See, there are LGBT people who come out and talk to you, but they might not necessarily be the persons who are either ready to have a long-term education-wise conversation with you. Please don't put the burden of them to explain their story. You're all smart, intellectual people. Educate, ask a friend, ask Google, go to a professional resource. Think about sometimes where we are consuming our news or intelligence from. Are we looking? What kind of media do we see? Does the media actually talk to us the real story? Or do they only sensationalize the story? Sometimes it's best not to rely on traditional media. Digital media, look at some of the films that are coming on OTT platforms. They are so much more inclusive than what we see and consume on mainstream media. Look at some LGBTQ blogs. I have a fabulous YouTube recommendation. Go and see this channel. It Gets Better India. Short videos of people who are talking about their stories, including mine. I've talked about my journey too. Short, powerful, impactful people whom you may have seen on screen, you may have seen on a book cover, to absolute people who may not be visible. Diversify your news set from wherever it's coming. And most important, absolutely important piece. So any of you who've taken a competitive exam would probably realize that you scribble on one of these circles, and then you suddenly, oh my God, my answer is wrong. Let me kind of rub it out. But will it be okay? Will it not be okay? Will I stand qualified because it's a machine-read stuff? Remember, in your allyship journey, you will make mistakes. You may still go ahead and misgender someone. You may use a wrong word. You may use a wrong frame. You may use wrong language. But as long as you get cognizant of the fact that you've used stuff that is not supposed to be spoken, which is not supposed to be said, apologize, ask the person, how is it that we can rectify the error and move ahead? You are good. Don't use what people tell you to be a conversation stopper. Use that as a conversation enhancer. If you are in a position that allows you somehow to shape up your inclusion and diversity policy, make sure that when you're posting job advertisements, it somehow takes you to that place where you can talk about, you can display your inclusion and diversity policy. Give it out in part of recruitment handouts. If you're doing a drive, play videos on inclusion around you. Make people comfortable, make them realize they're coming to the right place for a job. Expand, ensure that allies play a role an active role in the LGBT ERG. Work with your ERD. Sometimes when you want to research LGBT information and you suddenly put a keyword in your Google search and realize that your IT policies are blocking them. How does one then start getting access to information? Speak to your IT policy, understand their countries, how you can work around some of these searches. Build programs that actually help employees become change agents. So all might not sign up to be an ally, but all can sign up to be change agents. So invest in unconscious bias training programs, invest in catalyst programs where you can work with people to change their mindset and make them change agents. Partner with LGBTQ organizations. There are so many, and I'm doing, I'm just putting up a partial list of folks that I have worked with, but just telling you, it's the Keshav Suri Foundation, Pride Circle, Vivita, in hosting diversity in your events. Try and engineer them. Get them to engineer your events to be LGBT inclusion. Celebrate and share stories. Look at queer icons from India. A fabulous athlete, Duti Chand, is absolutely a great story to tell people. You could be an athlete and still be gay. You could be, a high-ranking official and yet be trans. You could fulfill your life's professional ambition and still be who your true self is. Remember, when you look at language, to avoid gendering people, don't make assumptions of people's gender by the way you see them. Ask them. It's a simple thing. You go and ask. Don't assume people are all of us. Don't term your, you can call your team members as colleagues and members rather than just say folks, ladies. Don't continue to use age-old terms of gendering people, ladies and gentlemen. Those terms are outdated. Be intentional about being inclusive. Tell people that you promote a positive environment where everyone is included and accepted. It's very important. Remember when I told you the point 4 is tell people about your community. Don't put people in boxes. People are not meant for be putting in boxes. They may fit or they may not fit. People have genders, clothes do not. So please remember, gendered language and restriction on this gender roles, etc., is you need to evaluate on a case by case basis. Avoid binary language. Sometimes we end up saying, oh, this is my husband, this is my wife, and we kind of leave people who may actually have a partner or a spouse. This could also mean people who are living in with each other. Not necessarily only LGBTIQ folks. It could mean folks of all sexualities and genders. Be visible, don't put the burden of visibility on LGBTIQ folks only. Wear an interesting pin badge. I'm a safe zone. I'm an ally. My pronouns are he and his. Give people an opportunity. According to a study done by Catalyst, millennials seek sponsors when they want to change job so like for example, helping find someone that they relate to is important for retention of these groups. We all talk of retention and attrition. That is something that plagues us all as HR professionals. Here is a very important way of addressing retention. So use physical representations. Like sometimes people find this rainbows, this pin labels, all excess, but it does help. It does a minimalistic approach to visibilism does help create a safe and inclusive space. Sometimes people till today ask me, Zainab, why do we have to use pronouns? Is it such a woke thing to do? And I must tell you that it's a great way to prompt a conversation on gender and sometimes talk about gender because we assume we know gender. We assume because we have believed in things like, okay, this is what a gendered person looks like and this is what I'm going to address. So gender sometimes is much more complex than you and I would understand. It's also a great way to welcome people and break ice. What a fantastic way of saying that, hi, my name is Zainab and my pronouns are she and her, but you can call me Zain. Isn't that a wonderful way of greeting each other? Ask yourself that who would refuse a greeting like that? Who would not warm up to something like that? Who would not feel welcomed and appreciated when someone uses it? And sometimes when you are not sure of people's pronouns, they might be masculine presenting, feminine presenting, but their identity may be different. How do you use the right set of pronouns? This is perfectly fine. Someone might be named Aishwarya but wants to be known as Ritik. How would you know that? Simple thing is ask. Asking is important. And most important, if you as an ally see something that's going wrong, please speak up. Speak up like the way we've been taught in prevention of sexual harassment at the workplace is if someone is undergoing harassment, one of our jobs as a witness or a bystander is to stand up against them. So when you see or hear something that's non-inclusive, something that's discriminatory, please speak up. So let me say, like, for example, you hear someone is misgendered, somebody. Think there's this group of yours that's having dinner and somebody misgenders perhaps a non-conforming or a trans person. So what will you do? What will you do is something very simple. You say, this is Ashish. His pronouns are he, him, and hers. He, him, and his. Ashish is a fabulous artist in his personal life. He sings well, but in his professional life, he's a great architect. He does fantastic line drawings. You should see his work. Share some of their accomplishments, interest, background. They are just not the gender or the pronoun, but the gender and pronoun go a long way in affirming that. And what you could say that next. Oh, that's Simran. She just joined our team last year. She handles all of her customer accounts. She's an engineering grad just like you. And let me introduce you to. Now, isn't that a great way to break the silo when it comes to seeing non-inclusive language being used? Now comes a very, very interesting question. Imagine you're standing at the coffee machine and you're talking, but you overhear some gossip. What's the situation? Last week, your teammate Jay comes out to you as transgender and asks you to start using pronouns she and her, and that her new name is Janki. You are already an ally, so she's asked you to be one of her champions, so that if someone else has questions, you can help. Now today, Ali, one of your colleagues, comes to your office and say, did you hear Jay now wants to be called Janki and think he's a woman? As someone with all of the facts, how would you respond to Ali's question? And based on the response that I shared in the earlier slide, we will say their name, correct the pronoun, reintroduce the person by giving them. And yes, we will say that it is totally Janki's perspective and prerogative to be addressed as Janki, and we are no one to question that decision, the name, or the pronoun. So, in the cafeteria, you're drinking water next to the water cooler, and you suddenly hear a group of people saying, they hear someone talking about a homophobic joke. Some people are laughing, some people feel uncomfortable, some people are just mute spectators. What would you do? What would you do as an individual? Would you stand up, correct, and say this is an inclusive space? Or would you pretend you'd never heard the conversation, walk out? Allyship is exactly that you have the spine to stand up against homophobic, transphobic conversations. And how do you speak up against bias? So explain a word that is considered, you could say that person, oh, that's gay person. Gay doesn't mean stupid, gay doesn't mean harmful. Make it above you. I consider myself a straight ally, and what you said is not okay with me or in this office as part of our policy. because I don't like a group, individual or group of people being stereotyped and disrespected like that. How would you feel if someone jokes about you or your family members in this way? So, like, I'm going to move forward and say that if you haven't yet come out as an ally, use this occasion to come out. Don't really wait for LGBT folks to come out to you. Use this opportunity, use Pride Month to come out as an ally. Educate yourself on some of these issues, speak up against hate. Sometimes people say, oh my God, these people come up with so many different terms: LGBT, IQ, queer, pansexual, asexual, genderqueer, non-binary. How am I supposed to keep track of all this? Simple. If you really like someone, if you are a welcoming person, you will start to get to know about them. Pronouns are not difficult. Understanding identities, because identities is about people. The labels that you put on them are about people. So we do share a responsibility in getting to know them better, their identities better. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Yes, sometimes we will goof up. Even with the best intentioning people, we will goof up. But do we go into our closets of misogyny then? The answer is no. If you are ready to work on a path that says, okay, I get the point, I totally understand what you're trying to say, I'm sorry I made a mistake, it is my learning journey, I would like to learn more, I would like to correct my mistakes. I'm not saying that after I make this mistake, I will never make a mistake in the future. But I acknowledge that as part of my learning journey, I can keep coming back to you and asking you for more guidance and help. Would you be willing to help me? Now, who would say no to an offer of request of support like this? Number 4, again, realize that being ally is not about scoring brownie points, is not about writing those flex goals in your annual appraisal. It's not about receiving accolades and standing as part of a team and taking a photo booth picture. It is all of that, but it is also about being actioning your the stuff that we are supposed to be dealing with. So when you hear about policies that are excluding LGBT people, when you hear disrespectful conversations, when you as a team realize that someone from your team is being outed, someone of your team is not getting the due that they are getting, what would you do? The most important part is that if you learn something valuable, if you learn one of the values of being a human being in terms of being a better ally, don't limit it to your workspace. Take it to your home, take it to your families, take it to your societies. Because believe me, what you do actually helps set the context for making the world more inclusive. I will only say this, a journey of 1,000 miles begin with a single step, and this is the step towards allyship. For me, allyship is not something about being a great person, it is about being a beautiful human being, and that's what I see in all of you. So today I'll say, change some of your attitudes, change some of your behaviors. If you're going in a wrong direction or off track, change your direction. Change lives through policy, voices, and you be that change that you want to see in others. Thank you, and I will open up the floor for questions.
So before we move into the Q&A session, we will be initiating the poll. Request all participants to kindly share your feedback. Once again, while doing so, request all participants to kindly post their questions in the chat window. Once again, I thank all our participants for joining our session today. We have received a lot of inquiry about the e-certificate offered by HRAI. You can claim your certificate by sharing your details, name, and session attended in an email to the email ID provided in the chat window. Please ensure that you do this by the end of this month. We will email the e-certificates to you based on the details received. So Zainab, we have received some of the questions from the registrations. So I'll just call it out to you. So the first question is, being a leader, how do I know the level of inclusiveness employees feel within the organization, and how do I identify the roadblockers and areas of improvement to increase the sense of inclusiveness in the employees?
So thank you. That was a very interesting question, Faisal. So there are two ways to go about it. You as an HR leader who's basically leading a team or working with people can either do to a dipstick survey, to an anonymous dipstick survey to see what are some of the attitude practices towards various groups, including gender, ability, LGBT, if you want to take an all-inclusive effort. If you feel there is bandwidth, there is scope of everyone answering only LGBT questions, great. So start off with questions about how would you feel if you realize that a team member is gay or transgender. What would we feel sympathetic? Would we feel have we in any point of life during our professional careers encountered discrimination at the workplace? Have you been witness to any? Do you think our policies adequately cover LGBTIQ folks? How would you be a better ally? What kind of programs can we do at the workplace through our digital outreach, through our corporate social responsibility imprint? What is it that we can do as people to kind of further the cause of inclusion? What do we do on diversity hiring? Are we doing enough? And are we, when we hire people, are we actually putting the right set of interventions in place? Do we talk about inclusive language? So all of these points can be mixed and matched depending on the competency of the organization to be able to deliver a DIP system. Now, if that is not possible, what you could do is pick up a group of allies together or HR business partners together and try and do a focused group discussion to understand some of the barriers that have come up for working with LGBTIQ in the process of onboarding, in the process of diversity hiring, in the process of employee onboarding, through the employee journey map. What is it? And externally, are we ready to open ourselves for benchmarking and showing the world that we are a truly inclusive organization? If you are able to do one of these two, it gives you a good set of responses to plan and implement. Now, in some organizations, due to bandwidth issues, due to non-cooperation, say some are from the management or from the senior leadership, nothing is stopping you from having discussions with certain key segments of your workforce and doing a focus group discussion to come and understand it. You will get a similar set of results, not very precise, but it should give you pinpoints of what needs to be done from a larger strategic perspective.
Very nicely answered, Zainab. We have one more question, which says that how can one tell if someone we know is lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender? What should we do if we think someone is lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, but they haven't told anyone?
You don't need to tell someone, you don't need to do a test to find out if someone is LGBT IQ. They will tell you if they are. So no, please don't be Sherlock Holmes and try to find out. That's exactly not what you are supposed to be doing. But what you could do is, if someone decides to come out to you and tell you that they are LGBT, understand that the person has put a lot of trust and confidence in you. Take that and pat your back for the first time mentally, because someone trusts you to be able to tell you something about their lives which is hidden. Second thing, if they come out to you, they may come to you sometimes for help. Sometimes they just need someone to talk to. Try and do that assessment. Are they asking for specific pieces of information? Are they asking me for your help in a particular situation? It could be targeted harassment, it could be sexual harassment, it could be some home-based issue. What is the kind of help that they are seeking? Sometimes people just need a sounding board. Are they only telling you about their life because they just want to talk about it? So make that assessment. If you are unaware of certain things, tell them, thank you for sharing this with me. Let me go and check if I can find information that you need, or let me check with somebody who can help, who I could probably connect you to get a better understanding of what needs to be done next. If you don't have answers at that moment, it's okay. It's also okay to say that I hear you. I'm trying to understand this. And sometimes whatever the person tells you might be in conflict of what your religion tells you or what your family upbringing has been. But it's okay. Tell them that thank you for opening up to me. I am also on my journey of being a better ally. Let me come back to you with the information that you need, or connect you to a better resource if you feel that the information that you have or the reach that you have is limited.
Great. One more question. How do we make ourselves more approachable to people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender?
I think you should be yourself, but at the same time, you should try and keep your perceptions about people's bodies, people orientation out of the way. They are first your work colleagues who happen to be part of the larger organizational family. So don't want you to sit and judge somebody else, because you would not want someone else to judge you. So don't use your preconceived notions about judging people just because they happen to love someone who you may not think may be the appropriate thing to do. So be open to the suggestions that come to you. Try not to be judgmental, because as human beings, we tend to immediately judge people based on the information that we have disclosed. If you don't have information, try and say that, yes, thank you for sharing this with us. Let me check and get back to you how I can support you better. You don't need to feel obligated unless someone is come to you in a very desperate kind of situation, and someone is looking for help and support that very moment. And if you feel that you cannot do it, immediately put them on to somebody else in the organization. But if you feel that there is someone has just shared information, would like to know your views or how to approach it, take your time, research about the topic, speak to your friends and see, or people whom you could get information about and get. So be approachable. Try not to be judgmental. Be a good listener, because people are telling you about their things. So your requirement is to be a good listener, not to be essentially override their story and become the hero. And be open to being comfortable with the uncomfortable. So certain times when people come and tell you about their story, you might feel uncomfortable. This is not what I have grown up with, and I don't feel great about it. But if someone is asking you as an ally, remember it's their story, not yours. You may choose to do something about it. You may choose to educate. You may choose to inform. You may choose to act on it. But if you're an ally, I would assume and expect you to do all of these.
Very beautifully answered, Zana. Uh, how should we respond to heterosexual friends or co-workers who feel negatively about a person who is lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender in our office?
Okay, I feel something is very simple, that when we talk about working in a workspace, we really don't have space for misogyny, for homophobia, for transphobia. As I said, our religious, cultural beliefs may differ from each other, but when we come to the workspace, we are an equal organization. Your orientation, your beliefs, your ableism doesn't put you at a higher pedestal than anyone else. You can leave all of these thoughts. So someone will ask you this question. I think one way of responding to this is, what if someone comes with extreme misogynist mindset against women? What would you do? Would you not stand up for what is right? You would. So I would expect people to also do the same thing about standing up for what is right. And that means you have a spine. Allyship gives you that spine. So someone comes and badgers you on your religion, on someone's religion, like what we see that's happening in television today. Won't you stand up for what is right? Tomorrow, someone comes and badgers someone on caste or regionality. Won't you stand up against what is right? So when we stand up for multiple situations for what is right, what stops us from being say something that it's the world has proved it's not a mental illness anymore. It is not a legal problem in our country anymore. Then what is the problem for you to stand up?
True, very true, Zainab. So there's one question on DEI, saying that how can DEI help to foster an open communicative environment for our employees, and how can we use our organization's overall strength to our advantage in developing our DEI strategy? Uh, Zainab, you're unmute. Yeah, you need to.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion is stuff that we've been doing from a very long time. We may not call it so. We may not have a policy that kind. It's all about being human. That HR person that comes and asks you, "Do you have insurance enough?" That HR person or a reporting manager that comes and does that regular check-in on you and says that, "Do you feel comfortable? Why don't you go home? Why don't you take the day off?" Are all process of creating an equitable workforce. So what we would do is go into your management and encourage them. Since we are a good workforce, we are a cultural organization, we believe in developing the culture, let us have a policy that calls out our intent. It's very important to do that, because if you don't call out your intent, how will you measure intent? And today it's no longer a fad thing to do. MNCs are doing it, Indian companies are doing it, small sized organizations are doing it. What stops you or any other group from doing it? I think if the smaller the group, the better you can measure results much more quicker. You don't need to have some fancy benchmarking or a fancy budget to be able to do that. You can start off with a small thing, start reviewing your policies, start putting an allyship group, and start doing some general sensitization programs and unconscious bias. The HR can manage to pull that and identify someone within your workforce who's going to be your focal pick. Because see, today the HIV Act, the Protection of Transgender Persons Act, the Persons with Disability Act, the Maternity Benefits Act, all require someone to be a grievance person. So it's also about compliance. So do the right thing legally as well, is my response to you.
Great. So just following up to that question, there's one more question saying, how do you advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion with colleagues who don't understand its importance?
See, I think that has to start somehow about convincing your leadership that there is a need, there is a business case, there's an ethical case, and there is a profitability case when we invest in DNI. Once that trickle down effect starts, that's when you start working horizontally across the organization to look at what can your colleagues do to be better allies, what can your teams do to be more diverse team, how do we root out unconscious bias, because diversity and inclusion is not something that is alien or new to Indian culture. We do it every day, and I think one needs to point out experiences or stuff that is being done in the organization which is similar to DNI. Doing a wellness survey, doing a culture survey, putting in cultural interventions, putting in affirmative actions in hiring, all of it is DNI, even if you don't name it as such. So I feel once your senior leadership affirms itself through a policy statement, things should be easier. Give people goals across the organization. Let DNI not be a goal exclusively only to the leadership or to the DNI council. It should basically filter down to everyone. Like for example, an entry level person can also have a goal where you are asking them to attend at least one DNI session, sign up for an allyship program, volunteer in certain things, those kind of goals. And then it can go up to the business head saying that they will ensure diversity, They will sponsor programs. They will look at the diversity business case. They will look at structural adjustments in the brands that they are working with, so on and so forth.
Yes, thank you, Zanab, for answering all our questions so beautifully. And thank you for this insightful and intriguing session. There are many takeaways from this session, like what is Pride Month and how important it is, what is ally and what actions they can take, examples of privileges. So it has been a pleasure being with you today. I'm sure our participants had a lot to learn and take away from this session. Before
Thank
we conclude with today's session, we would also want to thank the association members, Geisha, NASCOM COE, LinkedIn Local, Talgro, TLE, and WICCI for supporting these HRAI events. To know more about these associations, request you to kindly visit the links provided in the chat window. Thank you once again, dear speaker, and our participants for joining us today. Do join us for our next masterclass by Umang Seth, founder, Gay Bombay, and the Hugging Club of India, Mr. and Mr. on 1st of July 2022. That's it from our today's webinar. See you soon. Stay safe, take care, and bye for now. Thank you, Zainab.